Major funding for Election 2018 AETN debates is provided by AARP Arkansas.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Debate Week here on the Arkansas Educational Television Network. Tonight and for the next 4 nights, we'll bring you the candidates in all the statewide and congressional district races, beginning with the campaign for Congress in the 1st District. In alphabetical order, the nominees are Representative Rick Crawford, a Republican and the incumbent, Chintan Desai, the Democratic candidate, and Elvis Presley, the Libertarian Party nominee. The candidates will be questioned tonight by a panel of Arkansas journalists. Jonathan Reeves of KASU, Diana Davis of KAIT, and Dawn Tier of the Sun-Times at Heber Springs. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. Each will have 2 minutes to respond to a question. Rebuttals are limited to 1 minute. And at the conclusion of tonight's debate, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. The order of opening statements, questioning, rebuttals, closing statements, all determined prior to the broadcast by a drawing at which the candidates or their representative participated. Our timekeeper tonight is Cindy Gamble of AETN. And with that, our first opening statement tonight, Mr. Presley.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Libertarian candidate for 1st District Congress in Arkansas, 2018. I appreciate your vote November 6th. I'm running on a different platform than these guys. I'm looking at the unemployment rate over in District 1. I'm looking at the lobbying more business into District 1. And I want to grow the district. I want to make it grow again where there's been a lot gone past in the past. And I don't really foresee doing it at least the first part of the couple of years that we're going to be in there. But I think what we're going to have to do is going to take 2 or 3 terms to get it right. We've went down so far in the past, and I hope we can bring it back to a great district again. And I'll keep this short and sweet for you. Elvis Presley, District 1 Congress. Thank you for your vote.
Mr. Presley, thank you. 2 minutes, Mr. Desai.
Mr. Barnes, thank you for having us, the panelists. Thank you for organizing this. My name is Chintan Desai. I'm the proud son of immigrants who moved to this country in the early 1980s. They were looking for better jobs so that they could start a family. I think about the decision that my parents made to leave behind their friends, their family, their loved ones, everything that they knew and loved in the country where they grew up, to move to a place where they had little money and even fewer friends. My dad flipped burgers at a local fast food restaurant. My mom scrubbed floors at an arts and crafts store. They both worked second jobs in a motel just to make ends meet. Inspired by their hard work, I was called to a life of public service. And the day after I graduated, I moved to Helena, Arkansas to teach 5th grade social studies. And the time that I've been here and in my travels up and down the district, which has included visiting all 30 counties multiple times, what I've seen and what I've heard is that there are too many Arkansans who have a similar dilemma to my parents. They feel like they have to leave Arkansas to find a better life. I talk to young people who are absolutely certain they won't be able to find the jobs they want here in the state. I talk to seniors whose families have already left them because they're looking for better economic opportunity. And what makes all of this even more difficult is that we have a representative in Congress who doesn't seem to understand or care about these concerns. He has refused to listen to his constituents. He has refused to hold town halls. He has a constituent office that literally has cobwebs in the doors. If our congressman actually knew about the issues in the district and was talking to folks, he would know that we need to protect and expand Medicare so that more folks have access to high-quality health care. He would know that it is well past time to raise the minimum wage because the hardworking Arkansans deserve a raise, and he would be standing up to this administration in this unnecessary trade war. You deserve to have someone who's going to listen to you, who is going to fight for you in Washington, and that is what I intend to do. My name is Chintan Desai, and I would appreciate your vote.
Mr. Desai, thank you very much. Mr. Crawford, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I thank our panelists of journalists, and I want to particularly thank my wife and my kids, Stacy, and my son, Will, and my daughter, Delaney, because they give me the opportunity to serve, and that's what this job is about, is public service. And we see this every 2 years where you're given the choice to what direction you think we want to go. And for the last several cycles, you've given me that honor. It's a high honor and it's a high privilege that I have to serve. What you see before you tonight are three very stark contrasts. One that says we need virtually no government. The other that wants all government to control every aspect of your life. And I think what we need to concentrate on is the constitutionally prescribed role of limited government. One of our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, he stated that government is best which governs least. And I believe that. I don't believe the federal government should intrude in every aspect of your life. I think you're smart enough to figure that out for yourself. I think there is a constitutional role that the government plays, and we need to concentrate on filling that role in an appropriate way. And that's how I intend to continue to serve the citizens of the 1st District of Arkansas. I'm Rick Crawford. I'm your congressman from the 1st Congressional District, and I'm asking once again for your vote.
Gentlemen, we thank you all three for your opening statements. First question tonight goes to Mr. Presley, and it's from Mr. Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. And greetings to you, Mr. Presley.
Thank you,
The
John.
1st Congressional District is so large in size, extends from the north part to the south in East Arkansas. Some parts are experiencing growth, like in Jonesboro, while others, such in the south part of the district, are seeing the exact opposite issue. What would be your plan for helping the entire district grow economically instead of certain parts of the district?
Well, Jonathan, I thank you for asking me that. I think what our problem is we need more income coming in. And like I said, when I said earlier in the opening statement, we need to get more big businesses in. And I think one of our issues is about casinos. And I think casinos are really good for a state, as you can see what Mississippi has done with them. I believe that that we could get, instead of letting our businesses go like it did in 2009, I believe it was, and in the beginning of 2001, when we had a president there that didn't care about our business. They left out because we wouldn't drop the corporate tax. We need to lobby for more businesses to come in, get more taxes in. And if we do have the casinos come in, then we can actually lower property taxes for everyone.
Mr. Presley, thank you. 1 minute rebuttal, Mr. Crawford.
Well, that's a pretty good question. What do we need to do to improve the economy for everybody? We've actually been engaged in this for the last 3 years, where we get educators to come out and tour the 1st District and industrial sites around the district. So we call it our STEM tour. We've been doing it now, as I said, for about 3 years. So educators come and they will attend meetings and briefings presented by a variety of different industries so that they're better equipped to prepare students to go into the workforce. Whether that be a baccalaureate pathway or whether that be a vocational educational pathway, that to me is the path forward. I think what we've done is a disservice to our students for a generation, telling them that the only pathway to success was a baccalaureate degree. And so that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. When individuals go to a university and they don't succeed there, they come back home and they're looking for a job, and they become, essentially, they deem themselves as failures. What we need to do is pay more attention to the important trades that are out there, things like HVAC technicians, industrial engineering, and things of that nature, where you can make very good living. I don't know if you've ever been toured the Nucor facilities or the Big River Steel facilities, but they are very, very impressive, very, very technical in nature, and those individuals that work there make very good money. That doesn't apply to everybody in the district, but that's certainly one example of one thing that we've done. It's led the way here in industrial opportunities, economic opportunities in the 1st District of Arkansas. So we've got some skills gaps, but we also know that there are at least 500 jobs that are ready to be filled in the 1st District, and we don't have a ready workforce to fill those jobs. That falls back on our career and technical education. We're doing everything we can to pair up educators and industry to make sure we can address that skills gap.
Rebuttal, 2 minutes, Mr. Desai.
Yeah, so I think a couple things here. First, there has to be more investment in critical infrastructure projects. There are roads and bridges and energy systems up and down this district. I know this firsthand. We have gone and traveled in my car 40,000 plus miles, and we have seen the quality of our roads and bridges and energy systems, and they're not where they need to be. These are the kind of projects that can lead to more jobs being created. When we think about rural broadband and the jobs of the future, everyone has this experience when you're traveling throughout rural Arkansas. You're losing data service. You don't have access to the proper internet connectivity. If we invested in those kind of infrastructure projects, it would go a long way to ensuring that we have more jobs created. Beyond that, and I think this is the most important point here, small businesses are created by people who take risks, people who are innovators, people who are entrepreneurs, and people who do that are people that don't have to worry about things like good health care and good education. And on that front, I don't think that we have done a good enough job. They are individuals that are not willing to take those kind of risks. And if we want to promote small business, we want more jobs to come that route, we need to make sure that folks are taken care of, particularly with regard to health care, education, job training. Those are the kind of investments we need to create jobs here in the 1st District.
1 minute now for Mr. Presley.
Sorry?
For a rebuttal, if you wish, sir.
Well, I mean, we've all explained exactly what we need to do. Getting big businesses, we have to lobby for it first. And you want to make sure you get the right ones in. The infrastructure, like you said, on health care, anything that's going to hamper us is going to hurt us. So we need to go back and visit Obamacare. We need to go back and visit what Trump has got now. And I think that I think we'll see that combining both of the two, we could actually help us and get us more into the 21st century.
Mr. Presley, thank you. Next question comes first from Ms. Davis. Goes first to Mr. Crawford.
Mr. Burns, thank you. Congressman Crawford, China has been the largest consumer of American soybeans, accounting for 60% of the market, or every 3rd row of the crop grown in the United States. Since tariffs have been imposed, China has turned to the South American market, and Arkansas soybean farmers were dependent on that trade. They've seen prices diminish, and they're worried. Despite what the trade retaliation mitigation package promises, how do you propose finding more export markets for farmers to sell their crops?
Well, for one thing, I appreciate the question because it's true, China has been a significant market, 95 million tons projected for this calendar year. The EU is a distant second at 14 million tons projected for this year. We have shorn up some deals with the EU, and most recently the deal we've made with Canada and Mexico. That will not offset the Chinese market. However, what we're seeing take place now are buyers like Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina that are actually buying up U.S. soybeans to fill orders to China. So what we know is that China is demand inelastic, and so that means they're going to have a set number of soybeans just to meet their own domestic demand because they can't feed themselves. So they'll get them from somewhere. Will they buy them directly from the United States? Well, the evidence says yes, because recently there were at least 6 loads that went to China without the tariff. So we know that they are not in a position to withstand a prolonged trade war with the United States, and we've seen the evidence of that. If you look at the Asian markets, all of them have been on an uptick with the exception of the Chinese markets. They've been going down for a variety of reasons, but they're not in a financial position to sustain these tariffs. That's good news for American farmers. What we're seeing play out now is the result of a supply issue, where we're seeing grain stockpiled in places like New Orleans. We're seeing damaged soybeans that are in some cases being highly discounted or in some cases even being rejected. But this is a fundamental supply and demand issue. And the tariffs are an important tool, although farmers don't like the word, and I don't like the word either. It was an important tool to implement to force China to play by the rules. And China has been really been taking advantage of the global marketplace, particularly the United States, for the last 20 years. Since 2001, when they were granted accession into the WTO, they refused to play by the rules, and this is one of those tools that we may have to suffer some intermediate pain to get to a position where they're actually playing by the rules.
Mr. Desai, 2 minutes.
So let me be clear. My opponent has been a full-throated supporter of these tariffs since the very beginning. We have plummeting prices of soybeans, the lowest that we have seen in a decade. China is encouraging domestic production. They're encouraging production in other countries. And I know that farmers are hurting. I know this because I have, again, gone up and down this district, talked to folks like Bernie in Phillips County, Jim in Jackson County, and Bud in Poinsett County, and countless other farmers who are incredibly worried. And they're not just worried about making a profit, they're worried about their livelihoods. They're worried about bankruptcy. And there are clear indicators that this is a policy that is not working, particularly, right, the $12 billion aid package, the bailout that we didn't need. We didn't need to get there in the first place. And my opponent has used words like, or phrases like taking one for the team, congratulating farmers for taking one for the team, using words like strategic patience. Those are words and phrases that sound like they come from Washington, D.C. We could have gone after China in a much different way. If you want to go after them for their currency manipulation, for their IP theft, then you could have done that by leveraging the strength of our allies, of folks that are neighbors. Too often we feel like, especially in this Trump presidency, we feel like we have to go it alone. If we worked with our allies, and if we would have been in a much better negotiating position, we wouldn't have had to go down this route, which, by the way, it's not only going to hurt farmers, but pretty soon we're going to see this hurting consumers. You're going to see this tit for tat on these tariffs, where China is going to come back. They already have placed these tariffs on consumer goods, and people are going to pay more for those everyday goods at Walmart and Target. This was a bad policy, and I'm disappointed that our representative has been a supporter of it since the very beginning.
Mr. Presley.
First of all, let me applaud our current administration for the job they haven't done. Okay, we need to get into more, we need to bring in our crops to get, what's wrong with our farmers right now is because we can't get the crops quick enough to the market to sell before they go down. Okay, we need to utilize the Mississippi River if we can. That's one of the things that we need to think about, because right now we have a lot of grain bins on there, and we do a lot, but we need to get the crops out faster. We need to give the farmers incentives to get the crops out faster. And I think soybeans we should be selling to Cuba as well as rice.
All right, Mr. Crawford, 1 minute.
Well, it's a good point that Mr. Presley brings up. The Cuban market could be very significant. It's not enough to offset the losses to China currently, but it is about a $1.5, $1.6 billion market. But it's interesting that my Democrat opponent here is basically saying, let's go back to the Obama posture. Let's do things the way President Obama did it, because that just yielded such great positive results for the United States. The Chinese government has been lying, cheating, stealing, doing everything they can to supplant the U.S. economy, and that tees up a strategic move that they are angling toward a military expeditionary force that they've never had before. So by all means, if you want to see a continuation of the Obama doctrine with regard to China, then this is your man here, Mr. Desai. But if you want to see the field change, you want to see a good deal for farmers, then we need to understand that we have to play a little bit of hardball. And so I think this was entirely indicated. It wasn't something that we went into easily, but it's something that has to be done to get China to play by the rules.
Next question from Ms. Tier, and it goes first to Mr. Desai.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Good evening, Mr. Desai.
Hello.
With cuts in Medicare and Medicaid and rising health care costs, how do you plan to help the elderly and low-income families keep affordable health care, including affordable medicines?
Yeah, so absolutely. So healthcare in general, let me talk about that, is certainly a mess. We have seen some positive improvement after the passage of the ACA. We have more folks who are going to the doctor, not needing to go to the emergency room because they are covered. Rural hospitals from Stone County to Phillips County have stayed open. Bankruptcies are down 50% across the board. That is a big deal. However, I know that we're still not where we need to be on health care. I know this because I go up and down this district. I talk to folks who are worried about rising premium costs, worried about the rising cost of prescription drugs. And I talk to folks, right, like Dina in Lee County, Jennifer in Lawrence County, who are terrified about losing their health care because they have pre-existing conditions. And my opponent's votes back in 2017 would have resulted in the cuts to those protections for individuals like Dina and Jennifer. It would have led to 24 million Americans losing health care, hundreds of thousands of Arkansans losing health care. It would have resulted in many of these rural hospitals up and down this district shutting its doors. Now, if we want to make sure that folks are getting high-quality, affordable health care, look, there is a system. It is called Medicare. It is popular. It works. There are lower administrative costs associated with Medicare. These are savings that we could pass on to consumers. If we made the right investments to ensure that we protected and expanded Medicare so that more folks have access to it, it would go a long way in ensuring that folks have access to high-quality health care.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Presley.
I believe, and the Obama administration, I believe they tried that, and I think we should keep our guard up on that. I think what we need to do is actually figure out how many taxpayers we have in America versus how many recipients we have of Medicare and Medicaid, and each one pay their fair share. I think if we did that, then if we have over 50 million taxpayers in America and we pay $20 a piece, just at that cost, we're looking at quite a substantial benefit. So let's think about that. For the people that don't have the money, that can't afford health care, then as a neighbor, we could pitch in and let them afford those health cares.
Mr. Crawford.
Well, what my Democrat challenger doesn't want to talk about when he mentions Medicare for everyone, which may sound familiar, you might have heard that from the socialist candidate Ocasio-Cortez in New York. That's because it's a socialist program. The idea of Medicare for everyone would cost an estimated $32 trillion over a 10-year period. So I haven't heard any cohesive thought or argument on how you propose to pay for that. So this idea of Medicare for everyone, I think this was actually by design, that the Obamacare health care policy was designed to fail, to tee up a single payer system. And if you look at the evidence supports this throughout the healthcare industry, that we're seeing greater consolidation, we're seeing fewer providers, we're seeing fewer insurance carriers, and it points to one thing, that Mr. Gruber and company had this in mind from the beginning, and Medicare for everyone is a result of that. It will never happen, we can't pay for it, $32 trillion, we're already $21 trillion in debt, and these astronomical numbers may sound completely abstract, but the reality is we'll never be able to provide the level of quality care that we have, or we should be able to provide, if we're spending $32 trillion on a program we simply can't afford. You're going to keep the best and brightest out of the healthcare industry, and you're going to ration healthcare as a result. So when you can come up with a way to pay the $32 trillion, then maybe it would be a proposal worth listening to.
Mr. Desai, 1 minute.
Yeah, there's a price tag associated with expanding Medicare for sure, but look, sometimes it's better to have a little vision and planning in something that's particularly important rather than having no vision at all, which is exactly what we have seen from this Congress for far too long. I didn't hear any talk about who's going to pay or how we're going to pay for a $1.5 trillion tax cut for something as important as healthcare, for something as important as ensuring people have access to the quality care they need that's affordable. This is a vision that we need to invest in. And again, there's going to be a price tag to it, but sometimes it's better to have vision than no vision at all.
Next question from Ms. Davis goes first to Mr. Presley.
Yes, Mr. Presley, the EPA is set to announce a renewal and an updated label for the herbicide dicamba in the coming weeks. The herbicide has been a source of much controversy between farmers. One Northeast Arkansas farmer even lost his life in a shooting with another farmer over dicamba use. What are your thoughts in light of what we have seen these past 2 years with dicamba?
Well, speaking of herbicides, I think they're a bad thing for everyone right now. I just had a friend pass away from what we believe was a herbicide contamination. I won't say that for sure because they haven't done any research on it yet, but I think what we need to do is go back and figure how our farmers did this before the herbicide scare came about. You know, I think we need to go back and tell our farmers what we need to do is we need to create a cabinet that would actually get us confirmation on what we can do with hydrogen, not herbicides. I believe hydrogen is water soluble, and when water gets on it, it spreads. So can we not make something out of hydrogen content instead of the herbicides that we use to make it right for the waters, for the fish, for the fowl of the air, for everyone, for everything? We can keep Arkansas green. We can keep Arkansas natural. It's just its natural state. So let's try to figure out something in our federal level that would work for us, not for the benefit of making too much money on crops that they can't get to the market quick enough.
Same question, Mr. Crawford.
Well, I think the reality is this, that we have in the United States alone over 300 million people that we have to feed. Globally, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 billion mouths to feed. Farmers will have to necessarily rely on technology. That said, we need to make sure that the appropriate application of technology exists and that we're getting it right instead of right now. What we see now is an increase in costs for farmers to produce their crops. Even with economies of scale, Arkansas is particularly good at production, particularly soybeans. But what we've seen over the last couple of years is this technology has really essentially pitted farmer against farmer. You mentioned Mr. Wallace. Mr. Wallace, I knew him for a long, long time. He was a friend of mine. He was an advisor to me. And so I found that to be a great tragedy that really hit home. And it was really avoidable. But emotions run high, and we really need to think about how does this affect everyone, not just one farmer who may be using the technology. And what we've done is force every farmer into using that technology, if nothing else, just to plant defensively. So yes, we need the technology, but we need to get it right as opposed to getting it right now to make sure that it's sustainable over time and it's actually doing what it's designed to do the best to keep costs down for farmers and keep food costs below what the current levels. Our market basket is on the rise. We want to keep costs low. The United States is home to the cheapest, safest, most abundant food supply in the world, and we want to keep it that way.
Mr. Crawford is thanked. Mr. Desai.
Yeah, so certainly on the campaign trail, I saw firsthand the devastating effects that dicamba can have. Certainly the story that you talked about was a tragedy. I remember talking to Dallas in Woodruff County. He owns a watermelon farm over there, and he was talking about how he was getting some of that drift all the way across the Mississippi River in Mississippi. Some of that drift was coming over, and so certainly we don't want farmers to be harmed. We don't want this to be an issue that drags on, and so for me it is about investing in different kinds of technologies, looking at alternatives. I believe in the ingenuity of the Arkansan people, and we could figure out different technologies to get the same job done while not harming farmers up and down this district.
Mr. Presley, 1 minute for rebuttal.
Well, I believe that we should as a society take concern about our environment first. Let's keep it that way. And these guys have told everything that they know, and I've told everything that I've said. So we don't need to reflect more on that, I guess. I think what we need to do is realize that we are a state in the union. We have a choice to make. You have a choice to make as a candidate. Who's going to more benefit you, the person that actually sides with the herbicide company or the person that wants to make a difference with hydrogen? Hydrogen is much cheaper than the herbicides we use. So I think that we need to really reflect into that as far as hydrogen. So.
Next question, first from Dawn Tier, and goes first to Mr. Crawford.
Congressman Crawford, good evening. There are many people in the 1st Congressional District who go to work every day only to come home to substandard housing. These individuals are part of the working poor. Many have children, and even though their parents work, their families are often considered food insecure. What are you doing to improve their plight?
Well, I mentioned a little bit of that when we talked about our STEM program that helps really empower young people and get them in the workforce and being a more productive part of the economy. One of the other things we see is USDA has a variety of programs, and even though Jonesboro is what we might consider a city, it's 70,000 plus, our entire district, in fact, I think our entire state is classified as rural, but certainly the 1st District is rural. And as such, there are some advantages with regard to helping some of the self-help programs for building homes and low interest loans available for folks who qualify to help build homes. And the irony of the 1st District is that we are one of the most productive agricultural regions in the country, if not the world, and yet we still suffer from food insecurity. And so what can we do to help address that? One of the things that we've proposed is for grocers to be involved in actually helping become a distributor out in some of these rural areas that don't have good food choices. They're relying on convenience stores almost exclusively in some cases for their nutrition. So we've asked and proposed a private sector solution to get grocery stores involved in helping distribute things like fruits and vegetables, fresh fruit and vegetables and dairy products to help low-income families make better food choices and not be reliant on the high cost of convenience stores that may not have the best nutrition choices available to them. And so there's a variety of ways we can do that. But again, what we're trying to find is a way to collaborate with the private sector, maybe use some tax incentives to get them to come and meet us halfway. But the ideas are out there, and we're working toward trying to address that food security issue.
Mr. Desai, 2 minutes.
Congressman, if you're trying, I don't think you're trying hard enough. Look, you have put work requirements on SNAP benefits when there are already work requirements there. You have tried to make that an even stricter program. Look, 85% of SNAP beneficiaries are from working families. And then beyond that, you have opposed the hike in the minimum wage to $11 an hour by the ballot initiative. And you've called the minimum wage as it is now supplementary and introductory. And it's not, and that you said it was not designed to be a living wage. look, the point is that there are thousands, tens of thousands of Arkansans that are trying to live on the minimum wage and are not able to get by, and they're not able to buy the things like good health care and good education and food. And so, to me, I don't think that you have done enough when you talk about the combination of placing stricter work requirements on individuals to retain SNAP benefits, when you talk about opposing a hike to the minimum wage, when in fact we have seen no rise in wages from this $1.5 trillion tax cut a couple years ago. So bottom line is I don't think you've done enough.
Mr. Presley.
Could I have you repeat the first part of that question, please?
Yes, there are many people in the 1st Congressional District who go to work every day only to come home to substandard housing. These individuals are part of the working poor. Many have children, and even though their parents work, their families are considered food insecure. How would you improve their plight if elected?
Well, first of all, the minimum wage is a big impact on that. I believe that they're going to raise our minimum wage to 2021. It's going to be $11 an hour. Why not can you go to that now? Make these people more abundant, more affiliated with the music, or with the, not music, with the money. Give them a chance now, not later down the road when they lose everything.
Mr. Crawford.
Well, it's interesting that my Washington Democrat opponent over here has said I've done nothing to help with nutrition because I voted for work requirements, but then in the same sentence he said work requirements already existed. So which is it? Either work requirements existed or I voted to implement work requirements. So there's really, it shows a real misunderstanding about what's going on out there, number one. Number two, on the minimum wage, I believe what's happening right now is the right thing to do, and that's to allow the states to decide what the minimum wage ought to be as a reflection of the GDP of the state. If you want to put a $15 minimum wage in New York or Washington State or California, that's fine for those voters to make that determination. Maybe their economy can sustain it. I don't think our economy can sustain a $15 minimum wage. I think what I have said and what I'll continue to say is that the voters get to make that choice, and they'll make that choice on their own, and it should be a reflection of what the needs are here in the state of Arkansas. Whether or not my opponent agrees with me is really immaterial, because I could back up a truck with $1 million and dump it in his front yard and he would say, I'm not doing enough. That's because he has no idea what this job entails and the work that we do day to day helping citizens across this district.
Mr. Reeves has the next question, and it goes first to Mr. Desai.
Mr. Desai, many current members of Congress have been criticized for not being as accessible as they could be. Some of the things constituents are wanting to see more of are more town hall meetings or public appearances instead of just fundraisers. Some leaders do not attend scheduled town hall meetings. So what would you do to be more transparent and accessible to voters if you're elected?
Yeah, I've already made the pledge. I will hold at least one public town hall per month. I will ensure that my constituent offices stay open. I will stay in regular communication with my constituents. And again, that's something that we just have not seen from our current congressman. He has, again, had constituent offices that literally are not open. He refuses time and time again to meet with his constituents in a public setting, and instead hosts these expensive $75 a table, or $75 a plate, $750 a table fundraisers. And so, to me, being a congressman, someone that's going to be accessible to the people, you got to do more than that. You have to work to ensure that you're accessible, that you're holding these town halls, which I've pledged to do, that you are working to ensure that folks actually have access to you. Again, that's not something that we have seen. That's something that I will pledge to do once elected.
Mr. Presley.
I'll keep this short and sweet again, like I have all this session here. I think there needs to be a mandatory evaluation every month on what congressional members do in Congress. I think that just going in and voting on a bill without having time to really look at it, conflicting bills at that. Everyone's conflicting in Congress right now. We have Democrats, we have Republicans, we have individuals that actually don't get the idea of what workforce really is. They're behind the scenes looking and trying to vote on bills, and they can't do it. I think what we need to do is have like I said, a monthly evaluation of every bill that they have signed on. It's going to take some time, but it shouldn't be paid for. They shouldn't pay to go in and do. They shouldn't be paid for that. This is something that is their job, our job if we get elected. We should go in and donate our 8 hours of time to make this work for Arkansans, make it work for Americans, make it work for Congress. That's my take on that as a monthly evaluation.
Mr. Crawford.
Well, I'm not sure how to respond to that one, But as far as accessibility, I'm probably one of the more accessible members of Congress you'll find. In fact, there are even people in this crowd who have come to my office demonstrating, and we invite them in and ask them if they want a private meeting. They don't want a private meeting. What they want to do is get out in a crowd of people and using a mob mentality and excoriate individuals they disagree with. But what I want to do is hear from people in a meaningful way. If you've got something you want to talk about and share with me, I'm all for that. And we've made that abundantly clear to folks, but it's just not good enough. I guess what they really want me to do is to attend Antifa rallies or to attend meetings of the NEA Indivisible group or what have you, so that they can make a public spectacle of themselves. But that's not productive for the constituents of this district. So that's why I decline those invitations. But I do extend the invitation for them to come and meet with me personally. As far as the accountability and all this other kind of thing, look, we have reporting requirements. It's all online. You can see with great transparency what's going on in my office and what we do to represent the constituents of the 1st District and accurately reflect the needs of the folks that rely on us.
Mr. Desai.
Look, people want to talk to people in person, right? And if you have an issue with getting to the office, a public town hall is definitely going to be more accessible for folks. I go back also to the constituent service offices that time and time again we have seen that we don't have the resources, particularly in the Delta. The one that always is closed, the one that's got cobwebs in the doors, is the one in Dumas, and that's the one in the Delta, potentially the most vulnerable part of our district, part of our district that potentially needs the most support. And so to me, if I go back to what I would want to do, I would want to make sure there are constituent offices that are well-staffed, that are in the places that we need them. I'll continue to hold those public town halls every single month, and I'll make sure that people have ready access to me, whether it's through Facebook, whether it's through another platform. Those are all incredibly important, and that's what a congressperson should be doing.
We have time for another question, and I think it comes from Ms. Tier, I believe, to Mr. Presley.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Mr. Presley, it seems that more and more Congress is not for the people and by the people. Congressmen are wined and dined by lobbyists, special interests, and PACs, and their constituents pay the price. Would you be open to legislation making this illegal? Why or why not?
Ma'am, I can barely hear you up here. I'm sorry.
It seems that more and more Congress is not for the people and by the people. Congressmen are wined and dined by lobbyists, special interests, and PACs, and their constituents pay the price. Would you be open to legislation making this illegal? Why or why not?
Well, I'd be open to any legislation that would actually save the taxpayers money. I think that, myself, I'm a turnip green guy, pinto beans, steak, any kind of food that's good for me. The farmers grow this stuff, so, I don't go out and buy expensive meals. I don't like it. I just don't do it. I've got a Southern quality in my eating. It's thanks to my mama for making cornbread and beans when I was young. So I think that what we should do in Congress is we should limit ourselves on what we do in the public eye and what we do behind the scenes. Behind the scenes we pay for, but in the public eye they're paying for this and they see this. Why should we not? That's why no one can trust our government now. We can't. If we could trust them again, then we no conflict on anything, no purpose of saying, hey, we need to do this and that. You do show all your monies and stuff and your finances, but what is going on with individuals now is there's no trust in Congress, and we lost this trust in 2001 during the 9/11 attacks. That's where we lost our trust, and I do believe that if we get that trust back with the people can have trust back with their government officials. They'll know that these guys aren't doing anything behind the scenes wrong. They're doing everything right. Let's let them run the country.
Mr. Presley, thank you. Mr. Crawford, 2 minutes.
Again, I'm not sure you got an answer to that question, so I'll try to give you one. I do think that there is probably some things that can be done. There are already some legislation in place to prevent the rampant type of PAC activity that sort of drives a lot of political campaigns. What we've tried to do is to focus in on the issues that are important to the district and working with organizations and individuals within the context of what's important to this district. And if you can do that, I think you're fine. But again, what we also have to weigh that against is our rights under the Constitution, the rights of free speech, and allowing individuals and allowing groups to function in that space. And so I don't think more legislation is the answer. I think we already have legislation on the books, and this is probably one of the biggest problems we have in Washington is that anytime there's any type of high-profile issue, the knee-jerk reaction is to make more laws. Laws are hard to make, and then you make a bad law and it's hard to undo, and it's something we have to live with. And so we're governed under the rules of the FEC, the Federal Election Commission. My opponent has been cited a couple of times for violating the FEC Commission rules, and so he's probably fairly familiar with the fact that you can get in trouble if you run afoul of the FEC rules. But those rules exist to make sure that we do maintain some integrity within our system. But I don't think the answer is more laws. I think the answer is adhering to existing laws and making sure we do a full review.
2 minutes, Mr. Desai.
So let me be clear, I would vote for a constitutional amendment to end Citizens United. There is too much corporate PAC money in politics. We see that all the time. That is buying elections. It is simply not okay. I'll tell you what I'm proud of. I am proud of the fact that I have funded my campaign through individual contributors. I've raised over $100,000 through my friends, family, and people who believe in me and people who want to see our current congressman defeated. Look, our average contribution is $50 to $60. That is the way you run campaigns. That is a campaign centered on the people. My opponent has a laundry list of 10 pages of corporate PAC money that he's received money from. And it's interesting that he would talk about that he's trying to do anything about that when he is gladly taking that money time and time again.
Mr. Presley.
We all hear about corporate greed. We all hear about governmental greed. We all hear about everything. But what are we doing about it? Nothing. Look, regardless of your race, your wealth, or your religion, we are all Arkansans here. We are all U.S. citizens. Let's act like it.
Our next question comes from Mr. Reeves, and it goes first to Mr. Crawford.
Mr. Crawford, as state funding for higher education has declined over the years across the United States, public colleges and universities have had two options. Reduce spending, which is slow and difficult because it would mean cutting programs and staff and also raising tuition. Of course, the latter has been the most common result, with the cost of higher education far outpacing the consumer price index over the years. What role does the federal government play in ensuring that college remains affordable for everyone?
Well, there's a couple of things. In fact, we're actually working on this to try and, I'll give you a quick example. Research and development at the university level. I think that universities who develop new technology should be the intellectual property owners of that technology, should be able to license that technology and receive the royalties associated with it so it could provide a meaningful revenue stream to that university. And it's particularly true in the ag space. We had this conversation about dicamba. You know, University of Arkansas Cooperative Extension Service and the university researchers, they do a fantastic job in research and development. But I think we can do better in allowing them to keep the intellectual property and the royalties associated with developing that technology. And that could apply at virtually any industry where a university is doing research and marketing products. Excuse me. The other thing I think we need to look at, and Arkansas State University is a great example of this, is public-private partnership, and where you're collaborating with the private sector to increase not only educational opportunities, for example, the convention center that's under construction on the campus of Arkansas State University, but other things they're doing, for example, in technology. I'll cite Greenway equipment, for example, in the ag space, using ag technology in the private sector as a learning opportunity for their students. And so I'm not trying to highlight individual companies per se, but that's a good example of two public-private partnerships in collaboration with the university to help keep the costs down and recognize that we have a finite source in federal funding, and so we need to make highest and best use of it, and we need to look at alternative sources in the private sector. And I think you'll find that there are an awful lot of willing private partner candidates out there that do want to participate in that space.
Mr. Crawford, thank you. Mr. Desai, 2 minutes.
So I want to take this opportunity to talk about just education in general and a little bit about my story. So I moved here from a different state. I joined this program that places recent college grads in low-income areas to teach. I walked off that plane that day. I was 21 years old, and I was then thrust into a classroom a month after a summer's worth of training, 1 month of summer training. And I entered a classroom where there were textbooks that were tattered and in disrepair. We didn't have enough technology in the classroom. We didn't even have a working projector. I remember the kids sometimes I wouldn't have their full attention, perhaps because they had something else in their mind, because they hadn't eaten breakfast that morning. I had an administrator come to my classroom one time, the entire time that I taught there, to give me instructional feedback. And so the point that I'm making here, sorry, one additional point, after my time in the classroom, I became an administrator. I remember being heartbroken every single time that a teacher would come in with the best intentions, and they would, this is in Helena, Arkansas, they would not stay. A lot of times they would leave after a couple weeks or a couple months and then move on to the next thing. This is a huge issue, particularly if we're talking about Eastern Arkansas. So to get to your question, the general point in education is that we need more investment in education. It actually starts early. You need to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to attend universal pre-K, has that option to do so. We need to make sure we're paying our teachers more. We need to give our teachers a raise. There are far too many teachers that are leaving the profession too early. And then if we're talking about post-secondary opportunities, look, there is a role that the government plays. If we want people to have what they need to be well educated, to be able to serve our society, they need to have that investment in education. And the specific legislation I propose is ensuring that every individual has the opportunity to go to college, and if their family's making $125,000 or less, that college is paid for.
Mr. Presley, 2 minutes.
Mr. Reeves, could you repeat your question again one more time?
Yeah, as state funding in higher education has declined over the years across the United States, public colleges and universities have had two options, either reduce spending or raise tuition. The latter has been the most common result. So what role does the federal government play in ensuring that college remains affordable for everyone?
Well, everyone has to have someone over them, and the federal government can do that. But let me sum this up. There's 4 parts to your question. Let me sum this up in one word, and I'll make it short and sweet. Casinos.
Short and sweet, Mr. Crawford.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if my opponent here to the left got the question or not. We were talking about higher education, and he finally got to it, and his proposal was free college, just like Medicare for all. This is, I mentioned this in my opening comments. The contrast that exists here is that you can have somebody who is all for government solutions because you're not smart enough to figure it out on your own. We need the government to come in and take care of you. Or we can use private sector ingenuity and partnerships and things like this to help enhance educational opportunities. But at some point in time, this is the real problem with socialism. Eventually, you run out of other people's money. And so, look, we can't afford $32 trillion in health care, and we cannot afford free college for everyone. And if we could, how would that benefit? I mean, would it still be meaningful for you to go on and get that education? If it were free, people would still be declining that opportunity. That's not what this is about. We need to create value in education. The federal government plays a role in that, but we need to rely more heavily on the private sector as well.
Happy to say we can get in one more question that goes from Ms. Davis to Mr. Desai.
Mr. Desai, in 2011, Pocahontas saw record flooding. It was called the 100-year flood. The levees broke, again, unable to hold the floodwater back in 2017. Many residents couldn't afford flood insurance after the first disaster. They had nothing left the second time around. Why are these levees, do you think, not monitored more closely, and what would you propose to do to keep this from happening again? Are there alternatives to building levees?
So cannot answer directly why they're not being monitored. I do think that we need to make sure, and I mentioned it in one of my previous answers, that we need to have that critical investment in infrastructure. There are too many roads, too many bridges, too many levees up and down this district. I have seen firsthand. I've visited that levee actually during my travels when I visited all 30 counties in 30 days. People they're dissatisfied with the level of investment that we get in Eastern Arkansas. We have individuals who, they talk about how we're forgotten and that we have our voices that are not heard. And I think that there's a salient point there that we need to make those investments in infrastructure. And if we had a representative in Congress who was willing to listen, I think we could get that done.
Mr. Presley.
Okay, let me start off this question you have with just one statement. Make District 1 great again. Vote Libertarian, folks. Okay, my deal is this. You were talking about the insurance flood and all that and not having proper insurance and not being able to get it. Why should we stop giving them insurances when it's not their problem? It's not the problem to a solution. The solution to a problem is this. Let everyone have a chance to have their insurance if they can afford it. You got to give it to them in a way they can afford it. And insurance is what I would say there's a lot of greed in insurance and different ones. You really think about it, you have people wanting your money, but they call you on the phone wanting your money, right? I get calls all the time from insurance companies. We want to lower your insurance rate. Well, okay, we'll try it. But when we do, it goes up $20 a month. That's not lowering it. You know, get these insurance in on this 2011 flood you were talking about. Let's make this easy for everyone. And read my lips. Lower your insurance rate. Give everyone the opportunity to have insurance. Don't disguise yourself as someone or as an insurance company that can't give you insurance because you live in a floodplain. What is a floodplain? They're all over.
Mr. Crawford.
Okay, lots to unpack there. USGS is who I would support to do flood mapping. Right now we have FEMA. Now, asking FEMA to draw the maps for flood insurance is like asking a barber if you need a haircut. That's not the appropriate agency. USGS has the appropriate resources to be able to address flood mapping, which would really cover a lot of the concerns that they have with regard to flood insurance. We actually wrote a bill in this Congress that would do just that, give the authority to the USGS and allow them to do the flood mapping. That would be the first thing to do. Second thing, there already exists the statutory authority in the running water levee district there in Randolph County. The problem is it's not broad enough and it doesn't cover enough ground. So what you have is private individuals building levees that aren't to spec, that create problems on their neighbors, and that's a problem that does happen occasionally. And what we need is to harmonize that effort, broaden the base so that we have a broader base of tax support for it. And then the good news is the Corps of Engineers just turned over 404 permitting authority to the states. That's a good thing. Now we've got the states to be able to expedite a permit to get those things done. Now, if the levee is built to standard and the Corps of Engineers certifies that, at that point they can assume operations and maintenance costs to maintain that levee. A good example of this would be the St. Francis levee. That is a model of how you can do that and address, thinking about the 1927 flood, thinking about the 2011 flood that also impacted the St. Francis Basin, and that levee worked exactly like it was supposed to work and prevented catastrophic losses to life and property. If we can do the same thing and apply that same template, everyone's different, but that's a good model to work from along the Black River. That'll go an awful long way to help mitigate that.
Mr. Desai, 1 minute.
No rebuttal.
All right, and with that, we have reached the point in our broadcast, in our debate tonight. For closing statements, we want to thank our panel of journalists for participating this evening, for their questions. Again, as was predetermined at drawing prior to tonight's broadcast, the first closing statement is by Mr. Presley.
All right. You know, I'm the short and sweet guy. I'm actually 6 foot tall, so my deal is this. I want to be your candidate in 2018 as a Libertarian Party. We have a big step to make in Arkansas. We have a big step to make across America. You're given your chance to do this. We can make this work for the Arkansas people on the federal level. I will answer all questions honestly like I have today. I'm not going to go into detail on all the finances and everything because you can't really relate to that in financial world right now while we're just up here for a short time to speak. I think we should go back and go back and realize that we need honest people in office again, and I'm demand for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Presley. Mr. Desai.
Thanks. So you deserve someone that's going to listen to you and fight for you in Washington. In that regard, our current representative has failed. He has refused to hold town halls, going so far as to call them public lynchings. He has even gone so far, if we're talking about independent voice, being an independent voice, he hasn't done that. He has voted over 95% of the time with an administration, even if it means supporting a trade war that is unnecessary and hurts our farmers, or taking millions off the healthcare rolls. One of the proudest moments that I had during the campaign was earning the endorsement of Congressman Marion Barry. And what he talked about was that going to Congress isn't about just going to DC and casting these partisan votes. It's about serving people. It's about listening to people and making sure they feel heard and represented. And again, that's not something that we have seen in the last 8 years. I will be that independent voice. I will listen to you. I've already done that the past year. I have gone up and down this district 30 counties, visited them multiple times, put over 40,000 miles on my car. I've met people where they are, whether it's at the corn supper in Dumas, the 4th of July picnic in Corning, or the Watermelon Festival in Cave City. If elected, I'm going to continue to listen to you, make sure you feel heard, and make sure that I'm fighting for you in Washington. So that's why I would like you to vote for me. My name is Chintan Desai.
Mr. Desai, we thank you. Mr. Crawford.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. And to our panelists, thank you. It's an honor to serve you in Washington. It's been outside of being married to my wife, Stacy, and having my 2 kids, Will and Delaney. It's the highest honor I've ever had. My parents were public servants. My dad was career military, and when he retired from that, he served the rest of his career in public health. So I come from that kind of background. I understand how important that is. I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight into a lesson I learned as a young person. We were living overseas in England, and we were preparing to move. We got orders to go back to the United States. The trucks roll in, they move all your housing. Military folks, you know what I'm talking about. When the trucks roll up and they pack all your stuff, and the last thing that you put on the truck is the cleaning supplies. And so as a 7th grader preparing to leave England and go back to the States, there are the cleaning supplies, and my dad says, all right, let's get busy. And I said, well, you got to be kidding me, Dad. We're leaving this house. He said, yep, we're going to leave it better than we found it. We're going to leave it cleaner. We're going to leave it better for the folks who come in here behind us. And that's how I was brought up, to leave a country better than we found it. That's what motivated me in 2010 to come and ask for the honor of representing you in Washington. And that's what motivates me now, is to make sure that we're continuing to work to leave our country better than we found it. The job's not finished. We have a lot of work to do. But I'm asking you again, one more time, to send me to Washington. I've worked hard for you over the last 8 years. I'll continue to do that. And again, I'm Rick Crawford, your congressman, asking for your vote.
Mr. Crawford, thank you for your closing statement. Our gratitude to all 3 party nominees for their participation in our debate tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, the candidates for Congress in Arkansas's 1st Congressional District. And debate night continues here on AETN in just a moment. Gentlemen, thank you.
Major funding for Election 2018 AETN debates is provided by AARP Arkansas.